It is Friday. It is the 23rd of May. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Geun-young. We begin with the upcoming elections. Korean voters head to the polls in less than 2 weeks' time for the June 4th local elections, where the public is widely expected to send a message to the ruling party over its poor handling of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. But President Park Geunhye's apology and a shakeup of her top advisors may have given the ruling party a boost. Our Park Ji-won starts us off.
The failed handling of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster has hit the incumbent administration hard. Since the accident in mid-April, President Park Geunhye's approval rating had been on a steady decline, dropping to 51% in the second week of May, according to public opinion research firm Real Meter. But the president's apology to the nation this week may have turned the tide. Media research has Park's approval rating rebounding to the 60% range for the first time since the ferry disaster, up to 62%. Research View says a positive evaluation of President Park's public address on Monday pushed up her positive ratings by 4 percentage points this week compared to the previous one. Both polls surveyed some 1,000 people nationwide over the age of 19 and had a margin of error of 3.1 percentage points. Political analysts say her appointing of reform-minded former Supreme Court Justice An Dae-hee as new prime minister and accepting the resignations of her top security advisors could also play a role in gathering conservative support at the elections.
Due to prevailing negative views about the ruling party following its poor handling of the disaster, conservative-inclined voters weren't able to outwardly express their support for the ruling party. The president's call for changes means the ability to support conservative candidates has been restored to some degree.
However, in a survey conducted by Research and Research, 40% of respondents said the ferry disaster affected their voting decisions, and nearly 60% of them said their support has shifted to opposition parties. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
And on the investigation front into the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, authorities now consider the de facto owner of the ferry, Yoo Byung-eun, a fugitive after he failed to show up for questioning multiple times. Investigators believe Yoo, who's also leader of a religious cult, is hiding out in a devotee's home. Prosecutors say a number of residences are now under 24-hour surveillance. They're warning that anyone found helping the ferry owner to hide will also be punished. This comes a day after prosecutors were granted a warrant to detain Yoo. Now, they have also offered a cash reward of 50 million won, roughly $48,000 to anyone with information on his whereabouts. A cash reward has also been offered for information on his eldest son, Yoo Dae-gyun, who is also on the nation's most wanted list. Meanwhile, President Park Geunhye held a meeting with her security-related ministers earlier today, following North Korea's shelling across the western maritime border the night before. Now, she expressed deep regret over Pyongyang's latest provocation, as South Korea is still mourning the loss of hundreds of lives from last month's ferry disaster. Well, the president called on the military and related agencies to stay focused on protecting the safety of South Koreans living on western seaborder islands. The Korean leader also talked about bolstering Seoul's defense readiness with Washington and cooperating with neighboring countries like China on handling North Korea-related issues. The meeting comes a day after the president accepted the resignations of her top security advisor and intelligence agency chief following her pledge for sweeping government reforms. Meanwhile, North Korea continues its diplomatic activities with the outside world, meeting this week with senior figures from the U.S. in Mongolia and Japanese officials next week. It indicates Pyongyang is open for talks, but another provocation aimed at the South is sending mixed signals. Our Yoo Dae-gyun reports.
Senior figures from North Korea and the United States have been holding talks this week for the first time since the purge and execution of Pyongyang's second most powerful figure, Jang Song-taek, late last year. A delegation of North Korean officials headed by Vice Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho was scheduled to hold a meeting with Stephen Bosworth, the former U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy, along with other North Korean experts in Mongolia on Friday. The meeting is part of a series of so-called 1.5-track meetings that began last September when the two groups met for the first time in Berlin.
With North Korean nuclear problem still unresolved, it's significant that the countries are holding talks through the 1.5-track meetings, where the two can narrow down their differences.
North Korea also has talks with Japan slated for this coming Monday, where diplomats from the two countries will discuss Pyongyang's past abductions of Japanese citizens and its nuclear program. But despite the diplomatic activity, North Korea continues its provocative actions. It fired artillery in the direction of a South Korean warship near the de facto maritime border, separating the two Koreas on Thursday.
So overall, they're trying to mix up with the diplomatic maneuvers, with the provocative actions within Korean Peninsula. The thing is, we international community have not seen the North Korean behavior that offers a pathway to negotiating settlement.
At this rate, North Korea is unlikely to find a breakthrough in its efforts to engage itself with the outside world anytime soon. Yoo Dae-gyun, ARIRANG News.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Washington's plan to slap more sanctions on North Korea to rein in its appetite for provocations and threats is threatening to further damage U.S.-China relations. The ambitious measures, which could actively target Chinese companies in the north, come at a time when Washington and Beijing are already at odds over another very sensitive issue. Our Kim Hyun-bin tells us more.
The already tense relations between the U.S. and China could be exacerbated in the coming weeks and months by North Korean issues. The New York Times reported this week that Washington is weighing up whether to impose further sanctions on Pyongyang that target Chinese enterprises in the north. This option came to the fore last month when U.S. President Barack Obama held summit talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Tokyo. The two leaders specifically discussed more targeted sanctions on the North Korean regime that could cut off the flow of Chinese money into the country. North Korea is almost completely dependent on China, its only remaining ally for trade. China accounted for nearly 90% of North Korean trade last year. On a slightly different topic, the New York Times article also said President Obama was not involved in the Justice Department's decision to indict 5 Chinese military officers for hacking. It added, however, that the move was consistent with Obama's belief that Washington needs to get tough on China on this issue. The U.S. accuses Chinese President Xi Jinping of ignoring repeated demands for his government to stop hacking into American firms and stealing trade secrets. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Now, Japan has once again been called out for ignoring its past wrongdoings, this time by a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Loretta Sanchez did not just aim her latest comments at Tokyo, but she also called on her colleagues in the Senate to take action and make sure the former comfort women receive justice. Our Connie Kim has this story.
A U.S. Congresswoman in the Armed Services Committee has called on Japan to officially apologize for its sexual enslavement of women during World War II. Loretta Sanchez, co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Korea, said in a meeting that less than 100 of the 200,000 so-called comfort women are alive today and that their human rights need to be upheld. Urging her fellow congressmen to support the surviving comfort women, Sanchez called on the Japanese government to uphold a U.S. resolution passed in 2007 that calls on Tokyo to formally acknowledge, apologize, and accept its historical responsibility for enslaving women during World War II and educate future generations of the horrific crimes that were carried out. Sanchez said earlier this month in a military plenary session that Japan's comfort women issue cannot be dealt separately in the Obama administration's Asia rebalancing strategy. She warned that Japan needed to resolve its long-standing disputes in the region first. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Now, Thailand's military has announced a coup d'etat just 2 days after insisting one wasn't underway. Global leaders have been quick to condemn the move, which has everyone wondering what might be next. Our Kwon So-ah has the latest.
The promise just lasted 2 days. After a sudden declaration of martial law on Tuesday, Thailand's military announced a coup d'etat Thursday with an aim of ending the ongoing political turmoil in the country. World leaders were quick to condemn the move. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said there was no justification for the coup and warned of negative implications for the U.S.-Thai relationship, particularly military-related ones. The European Union and neighboring Asian countries spoke out as well. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon voiced deep concerns over the threat to the human rights of the Thai people.
The Secretary General is seriously concerned by the military takeover in Thailand today. He appeals for a prompt return to constitutional, civilian, democratic rule and an all-inclusive dialogue that will pave the way for long-term peace and prosperity in Thailand.
The army summoned ousted Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra and other associates to a meeting this Friday morning at an army facility. Yingluck's aides arrived in the morning while the former Prime Minister appeared at noon. There have been no signs of unrest on the streets of Thailand so far since the launch of the coup. The coup includes a nationwide curfew of 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. and soldiers dispersed demonstrators at 2 main protest sites. Government programming filled the airwaves and international news channels were blocked. Korea's foreign ministry raised its level 1 travel advisory that was in effect for much of Thailand to a level 2 on Friday, meaning travelers should take caution when traveling to or within the country. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
When the 17th Asian Games kick off in the South Korean city of Incheon this coming September, North Korean athletes will be there competing for medals. North Korean state media made the announcement this Friday upon a decision by the North Olympic Committee, which added they were taking all the steps necessary to participate. The South Korean government had said earlier this year that North Korean athletes were welcome at the Games. They run from September 19th through October 4th. An achievement for Samsung. The electronic giant has unseated Sony as the #1 maker of UHD TVs, or ultra-high-definition televisions. Samsung claimed 22% of the global UHD TV market in the first 3 months of the year, and this is according to data by the U.S. analysis Display Search. Now, Sony, #1 last year, fell all the way to the 5th place with less than a 10% share. Meanwhile, the Korean government and the nuclear energy industry are taking preemptive steps to prevent power shortages during the hot and sticky summer season. The Energy Ministry says the nation's nuclear power plants have been undergoing a special inspection this month, and the inspection, which will run through the end of June, is in the wake of last year's energy crisis and is separate from regular checkups. Now, last summer, several nuclear reactors went offline, either due to regular inspections or because they were found to have used parts with forged safety certificates. The government had to ask the public to voluntarily slash their energy usage when the nation was hit by a prolonged heat wave. Korea has a total of 23 nuclear reactors, and they provide roughly 1/3 of the nation's total energy supply. The global e-commerce website eBay sent a chill down the spine of millions of users this week when it revealed that their personal information may have been compromised. Now, Koreans know the feeling all too well, unfortunately. Earlier this year, the largest data leak in the nation's history ultimately led to 3 major credit card companies being banned from key business activities. These bans have expired now, and the firms in question say they have fixed the problems that led to the leaks. But have they? Our Shin Se-min has more.
A security breach that affected some 20 million bank and credit card users earlier this year had a domino effect in the sector. The CEOs of the card companies responsible stepped down, and the nation's financial watchdog slapped a 90-day business suspension on KB Kookmin Card, Lotte Card, and NH Nongyap Card. 3 months later, the companies say they have revamped their security systems. The business suspensions on all 3 credit card companies were lifted on May 17th. But in less than a week, the companies have been slapped with additional lawsuits seeking compensation. The looming lawsuits are on top of the combined 3 million customers and $155 million the companies lost during the suspensions. In an effort to win clients back, Lotte Card, NH Nongyap Card, and KB Kookmin Card are touting a number of new measures that include security education programs for employees, transitioning to a cloud system to allow for better monitoring, and setting up a security task forces. But it may not be enough.
At this point, with the lenient government sanctions, I believe additional personal data leaks are highly possible.
I personally am offended, thinking that my personal information is easily exposed and might have already been used by hackers. I'm not pleased at all.
According to industry experts, there's still good reason for customers to be concerned.
If an American or a Japanese company fails to protect their clients' personal data, their courts will go as far as to bankrupt the company. In Korea, the penalty for massive data leaks is insufficient. If these firms were able to fix all their problems within just 3 months, this year's security breach wouldn't have occurred in the first place.
Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geunhye named a former Supreme Court justice with a reputation for fighting corruption as prime minister to replace an incumbent who resigned over the government's slow response to last month's ferry disaster. An Dae-gyun will be mandated to oversee the reform of government structures, and that is according to the presidential office of Changade. So will the latest appointment impact the nation's economic policy? Dr. Kim Byung-ju joins me live in the studio. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
So as An Dae-gyun was named the new prime minister nominee yesterday, in today's headlines in the local paper, we saw speculation of the top economic policymakers team being replaced as well. Now, how real is this possibility?
Well, that's a tough question. We know this new prime minister nominee is a person with strong character. He's known to be a mover, shaker, and breaker. Perhaps very strong leadership is expected. So for that, a lot of speculations are saying perhaps he will need a whole new cabinet, meaning considerable changes in the economic policy team here. But the thing is, I mean, fundamentally speaking, in Korea, every time there's an issue, media loves to talk about the cabinet reshuffling and presidential office reshuffling and all that. And we know where the motivation comes from. It comes from the politicians as well as people in the media business who like to see themselves perhaps taking these kind of positions. You know, give us a chance to serve the country, perhaps. That's what they're saying. So there is that intrinsic tendency in Korea to ask for changes overall. Having said that, what I'm saying is the current economic team, it may not be entirely easy to find their faults in terms of the way they've been conducting their policy-making business here so far. Of course, there have been criticism that some of the key policymakers, including Deputy Prime Minister, is a little bit weak on the driving side of implementing policies, and they have been often been shown as writing down things when President speaks in a meeting and business, always passive, trying to implement what President says, all little details, rather than actively initiating their own initiatives, introducing their own ideas. So considering the characteristics of the new Prime Minister nominee, He's the one who would like to perhaps introduce new changes, and they're saying this kind of passive team may not work as well, especially when the economic team has in front of themselves the task of implementing the so-called 3-year economic reform plan and the big-time deregulation drive, as well as a presidential initiative of normalizing the abnormals altogether. So they're saying, well, there is a certain ground to the speculation that perhaps we need some change in the economic policy team.
Well, definitely, we know that An Dae-hee has a reputation of not being fearful to speak up to the president. So definitely something that we look forward to seeing. We certainly do not fuel these speculations any further. However, since it is an important economic and business issue here, we cannot help but take a look and consider some of the names of the new faces that could make up the potential new economic policymakers team. What are they? Who are they?
In the media today, we notice a lot of names being aired here, but one of the names that seems to be most often quoted is Choi Kyung-won, the former floor leader of the ruling party, who just has resigned from his position. And he is a person who has extensive background. He built his career as a government official at EPB Economic Planning Board, meaning that he has mastery over financial and economic policies altogether. And he also served as the industry minister, and their rare positive reputation and review about his performance, that's what we note. He did a good job there, and he was active in the media business as a policy visionary and all that. Of course, the biggest part is his political career. As I said, he led the ruling party pretty well as the floor leader. So they're saying, you know, perhaps An Dae-hee as the prime minister, a strong character, and Choi Kyung-won as the deputy prime minister. That team together, that image itself will set a stark contrast to the current team, Jung Hong-won, the prime minister, and Hyun Oh-seok, two very gentlemen, perhaps a little bit passive, but these two new faces, possibly, if that's materialized, would represent totally different kind of a team here, strong drivers altogether, and making changes. So that speculation is quite rampant, and we'll have to wait and see.
In terms of characteristics, I would say the Jung Hong-won, Hyun Oh-seok team was more of a well-rounded kind of characters, whereas you know, the An Dae-hee and the Choi Kyung-won team, that would be quite some character there.
Absolutely.
All right. What about the reshuffling of the presidential office's economic team? Will that depend on Kim Ki-chun, the chief of staff's future?
I think so. I think so. When we talk about economic policy making team within the presidential office, we probably mean Cho Won-dong, the economic chief economic secretary, and other perhaps, I don't know, Yoo Min-bong, the planning chief secretary, perhaps. Yoo Min-bong is busy with the reform measures right now, so I don't think he'll be the one who will go away. And Cho Won-dong, the reputation has been quite positive. He's been working very hard, and he's been delivering results. So it's difficult to imagine specific names that will go. The factor, variable, as you mentioned, will be Kim Ki-chun's future. The absolute majority seems to be expecting, since Nam Jae-jun, the intelligence chief, is gone, they're saying Nam Jae-jun as the intelligence chief and Kim Ki-chun as the chief secretary, they were driving the nation pretty much, critics have been saying. But since Nam Jae-jun is gone, President may not afford to let Kim Ki-chun go either. So in that case, no major change within Cheongwade team. But minority are saying, well, perhaps it's possible for Kim Ki-chun to finish up this transition period and then open a second phase for the president, and then he may step down. In that case, major reshuffle of the Cheongwade would be indeed possible. So there is a big variable out there.
Now, you just touched upon the resignations of the intelligence chief Nam Jae-jun and the Security Council head Kim Jang-soo. Of course, the Kim Jang-soo's resignation to me came as a bit of a surprise. But how will they influence the topic or the issue discussed today?
They're saying perhaps the impact on the economic team will be rather limited. The impact from this set of double resignation will be rather limited. And they're saying because these are two key figures, even the impact on the overall foreign policy line of the team's lineup will be limited, because the government really should want a certain level of consistency and continuity here. But the thing is, still, I think the variable is still out there, because President, when letting Nam Jae-jun go, the head of national intelligence, President may wanted to signal to the people that she is very serious about real change of overall her team here. So perhaps depending on the result of the local election, I think these changes will, if they happen, will happen after the local election. So depending on the local election, if a ruling party loses big time, perhaps it may be necessary to see a bigger scope of changes, including bigger changes in terms of cabinet reshuffle and then changes even within the presidential team. If ruling party indeed minimizes its loss, in that case probably we'll get to see smaller size of changes. So I think we absolutely need the time on this question here, and we'll be closely watching.
Right, and from a just average Korean's perspective, we'd like to see less of politics involved in that reshuffling, and perhaps more, geared towards the real security and safety of the Korean people.
I agree.
Well, that's ideal, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was going to say.
All right, Dr. Yoo Byung-eun, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's your business today on this Friday. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.